impressed to see all of you in the room here raising money for blood cancers, especially since I haven't exercised in 5 years. And the idea of getting up at, 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to go run 10 miles is very daunting to me. So thank you. Well, while they're getting my slides set up, I thought I'd start by saying a little bit about why I'm here. I am a researcher at UCSF. I'm a doctor as well, and I take care of patients with acute myeloid leukemia mostly, and I also do research in that disease. And the last time, actually, I was at a Leukemia Lymphoma Society event, someone asked me, how did you get into this? Why do you do this? And so I thought I'd share a story about one of the reasons why I got into being a leukemia doctor and doing research on leukemia. I actually was a first-year resident, and so it was my first year out of medical school, and I was on call, and I was taking care of a young man with acute leukemia, and he was about 30 years old, and he had a young daughter, and his leukemia had unfortunately come back after he'd undergone a stem cell transplant, and he was very, very sick. His leukemia was basically raging throughout his body, and his kidneys were shutting down, and his electrolytes were all out of whack. And I did everything I possibly knew how to do to help him. I stayed up all night. I called everybody I knew, and I couldn't fix it. And finally, I got to my attending doctor, who called me back, and he was a very experienced leukemia doctor. And he said to me, Kathy, this man is dying of leukemia, and there's nothing you can do. And that was just about the most horrible thing I'd ever heard in my life. And I do research in leukemia, and I take care of patients with leukemia because I don't want anybody to ever have to hear that again. I don't want any young doctor to have someone say to him or her, this man is dying of leukemia and there's nothing you can do. So that's why I'm here. And the Leukemia Lymphoma Society makes it possible for me to do the research that I do. So as was said, I have a grant from the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. It basically pays my salary. It lets me do research. Otherwise, if I didn't have that money, I'd have to see more patients. I wouldn't be able to do the research that I'd be able to do. So that totally funds my ability to be able to do research for this disease. It also pays the salary of my boss, my mentor, and it also funds a lot of the research that we do in the lab. So it makes it all possible. So you guys really do something very, very important for these patients. And I thought I'd share a little bit about why it's really important. Hopefully this will work. Just by talking a little bit first about where the status of cancer research funding in this country is. We've been talking a lot about the budget recently, and this is the NIH budget from 1998 to 2011. And you can see this period, 1998 to 2003, was a pretty good time. It was a period where Congress had decided they were going to double the NIH budget. They said, we're going to put some money into improving the health of our citizens, and this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to double the NIH budget and grow the biomedical research community in this country. And then something kind of unexpected happened in 2001, September 11th, 2001. And we all know what that was. And if you look at that period after 2003, after that period of doubling, the NIH budget hasn't changed at all, really. It's been rather stagnant. And if you look, there are these orange bars here. And what that represents is the stimulus funding. So there was a little bit of extra money that we got a couple years ago to sort of stimulate the economy. But that money is essentially gone now. And so now we're basically in the same boat that we've been in for the last 10 years. Meanwhile, this is the number of NIH grant applications. So the purpose of the doubling of the NIH budget was to grow the biomedical research community so we could do better, we could learn more, we could make our citizens healthier. And so we did. We grew our research community. And so there's been an increase in the number of NIH grant applications, but the money hasn't changed. And this is the the increase in the number of investigators that has gone along with it and the number of grants those investigators have submitted. But again, remember, the money hasn't changed. Meanwhile, we've been conducting a little thing called the War on Terror. And this is the amount of money that has been spent on the War on Terror. The slide is a little old, so it's from, the covers a period from 2001 to 2009. Those are the billions of dollars that we have spent fighting terrorism. That's the budget of the National Cancer Institute in that time. So that's the difference. Meanwhile, the number of US deaths that have been due to terrorism, so there is a bar there, but you can't really see it. Meanwhile, that's the number of US deaths due to cancer. So that's over 4 million people. So if you break down the numbers a little bit more, spending per US death due to cancer, $786.52. Spending per US death due to terrorism, $254,365,000. So for every $1 we spent for a death due to cancer, we spent $399.86. I can't even say that, but over $300,000 per death due to terrorism compared to $1 spent for a death due to cancer. So that's why what you do is so important. There's clearly a huge gap in the funding for cancer research, and the LLS really helps to fill that gap. And so I want to tell you about why this research is important. So acute myeloid leukemia, this is the disease that I do research in. It's a blood cancer. It affects 12,000 people a year, 9,000 of whom are eventually going to die from this disease. So that's 3/4 of the people that get diagnosed with this disease. The mainstay of therapy for this disease is chemotherapy and stem cell transplant. And that hasn't changed in 3 decades. So that means that the treatment and outcomes for this disease have not changed in 3 decades. We have a lot of work still to do. And there are some people that do even worse than, there are subsets of people with leukemia that have a particularly bad outcome. And one of them is a subset that carries a mutation in a gene called FLT3, and that's this FLT3 ITD mutation. And this is a survival curve, and basically what it's telling you is that if you have this mutation, your chance of surviving long-term from this disease is about 10%. So this is the months from diagnosis. We need to make that better. And we're trying, we're doing it. Hopefully in the coming years we're going to do it. What this is telling you is this is a drug, AC220, that I work with in the lab, and I treat patients with this on clinical trial, and we're working in the laboratory to understand how this drug works. And this drug has about over a 40% chance of getting patients who are relapsed and refractory with AML, who have this mutation, into complete remission. 40%. That's way better than 10%. But you know what? It needs to be better. It needs to be 100%. And that's what we're doing in the lab. We're working on studying mechanisms of why people relapse after they've been treated with this drug, and we're trying to identify new drugs and better drugs that can take care of some of these mechanisms of resistance and make that 40% 100%. Now, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because sometimes there is a magic bullet. Now, what this is the cover of Time magazine from May 2001, and it's talking about the approval of the drug called Gleevec. Some of you guys may have heard of Gleevec. But basically, Gleevec is a pill. It's a drug that's targeted toward the mutation in another leukemia, chronic myeloid leukemia. Now, chronic myeloid leukemia used to be almost uniformly fatal unless you got a stem cell transplant. So before Gleevec was approved, stem cell transplant was basically your only way of being cured from this disease. And otherwise, you were going to die from it. This is a survival curve in the era of Gleevec for patients with chronic myeloid leukemia. This is the people that were originally on the clinical trial for Gleevec. And basically, 8 years out after starting the drug, 85% of them are still alive. 93% if you consider those that died due to the disease. And so you took a disease that used to be uniformly fatal unless you got a stem cell transplant, and you gave people a pill, and basically now they can live basically what we tell them is they can live a normal lifespan by taking a pill. So they've turned chronic myeloid leukemia, what used to be a fatal disease, into basically a chronic disease like diabetes or hypertension. And this is the difference that it's made. Each of these lines represents the survival of chronic myeloid leukemia. So these are patients that were surviving years from the time that they got diagnosed by decade. So this was the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s. And up here in that yellow curve, 95%, those are people who got Gleevec. And so we've made a tremendous improvement in the lives of these people. And so when you do something that's good, you get to be called a rock star of science. And this guy here, Charles Sawyer, was awarded this Lasker Prize in 2009 for helping to develop Gleevec and also for discovering why people relapse on Gleevec and developing the next generation of drugs for those people. And the Lasker Prize is actually also termed what we call the American Nobel, so it's a big deal. And he actually I think of this guy actually, Charles, as my scientific grandfather, because he did this work actually with my boss, Neil Shaw at UCSF, and they did this together and they figured out why people relapse on Gleevec, and they found a new drug that can help a lot of those people who relapsed on Gleevec. And when Charles got this prize, he wrote an essay in Nature Medicine, and I wanted to share a little bit about from that essay with you, because I think it kind of epitomizes why we do this research and what a lot of us are inspired by. So he said, one of the unique aspects of life as a physician scientist is the opportunity to care for patients who, in effect, are the laboratory for your translational ideas, who volunteer their lives to allow us to test our hypotheses. And I thank all of the patients and their families for their courage and their inspiration. And then in the article, he put the pictures of his patients who have inspired him. So this guy, he was one of the first 3 people to get Gleevec. He's still alive, 11 years later. This woman, who's, I think, participating in a team and training event in this picture, was one of the, in the early cohorts of Gleevec. She's also still alive. This gentleman also participated in the first clinical trial of Gleevec. He still races classic cars in the Mojave Desert. He may die from that. And this gentleman initially responded to Gleevec and unfortunately relapsed with the disease about a month before the second generation drug that Neil and Charles discovered that's effective for patients that relapse with drug-resistant mutations went into clinical trials. And he actually had a mutation that would have responded to this drug. So if he had lasted 1 more month, he potentially could still be alive. But unfortunately, he's not. So why we are here? We are making progress to improve outcomes for patients with leukemia, but we need to make more. We need to make a lot more. And we need your help to do it. So thank you for being here, and thank you for doing what you do.